All right, hello everybody. I'm Dr. Wickham Simonds, and I'm going to be adjusting my camera here. I'm in an old farmhouse in the mountains of North Carolina. It's about 100 years old, or a little over that. And I'm in a back room of the farmhouse. And so, anyway, I got the best lighting and so forth I can get. I think this room will work. And I thank you for joining this Adapt Live event, and for giving me the chance to address you. This is a real honor to do this. I'm going to be talking again today about the fundamentals, some fundamentals in obesity treatment. I'm an obesity medicine specialist in the Triangle region of North Carolina, and I treat obesity using ketogenic diets. And I also use other methods, but this is the primary method that I use. And I've been doing this for about 15 years. And so during that 15-year period, I've accumulated some knowledge about these things, and I like to share that with anyone who will listen. Before we kind of really delve into that, I want to remind you of the event that's coming up on Saturday, September 22nd. So Adapt Your Life North Carolina, we're going to have a live event there, and if you're in the North Carolina area, or you want to travel to North Carolina to be part of this event, it's going to be a really great event. And it's going to be on Saturday, September 22nd at the Westwood Baptist Church. The address is 970 Leesburg Road in Roxborough, and it's going to be myself and Eric Westman and Amy Berger and Christy Sullivan and Casey Durango. So we're going to have a rock star lineup of speakers there, and it's going to be just a lot of cool people in the crowd, and there's going to be a lot of energy. I like getting people together that have a similar mindset on these things and sharing ideas, and the energy is created, and it's good to kind of get around people who think the same way, so that you're energized and that you're motivated to continue on with this lifestyle. Because in the United States, there's just so much in the way of the societal way that we conduct ourselves in regards to the intake of food and beverage that's wrong. And it's real easy to get off track if you're not surrounding yourself with the right kind of people in your life and in the right sorts of circumstances. So these kinds of events are extremely helpful. They're a great place to learn more about the benefits of a ketogenic lifestyle, and I'm real excited to be part of the Adapt Your Life North Carolina event. And again, that's on Saturday, September 22nd, and it's going to be in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina, and I would really love to see you there. I hope you'll come out and be part of it, because it's going to be a lot of fun. So with that being said, I'm going to start delving into the topic of obesity again. So when I talk about that every day to patients, and even unfortunately to many of my medical colleagues in the medical community, people think about this as being a character flaw. You know, they just think of it as a weight problem, and if you eat less and exercise more, problem solved. They think of magazines in the checkout line at the grocery store that have pictures of entertainment personalities losing or gaining weight and so forth, as if it's all about appearance or something like this. And that's wrong. It's totally wrong. The obesity is a very complex disease, and we're learning as physicians and scientists a lot more about this, and it turns out to be way, way more complex than we thought. So the body fat is an organ, and it plays a very big role in this disease. And so I think of myself as a specialist on this organ, and what you eat and drink has a very big impact on this organ and this disease process. It's not the only thing that's involved, but it's a very big part of it. So when I treat patients with obesity, for me to ignore the intake of, or to minimize the intake of what they eat and drink is an absolute fundamental critical error. And for physicians to do this is a critical error. I remember when I first kind of started delving into this field, I'm primarily trained in emergency medicine, and I was working as an emergency medicine doctor in the western part of the state of North Carolina, and making good money and very successful and so on and so forth. I'm going to drink some water here. Pardon me, my mouth's a little dry. And so my colleagues thought I was an absolute lunatic for doing this. And it's because they thought, well, people just go to chain outfits I won't name the names, but I think you know what kind of places I'm talking about. They just go there to lose weight, and it's more or less a point or calorie counting scheme, and you restrict your intake and this, that, and the. Why do physicians need to be involved in something like this, right? And so, food is food, right? And they don't think about, they never thought about, the importance of this, and so they couldn't relate to what I was doing. And I'm over there thinking, wait a minute, it's got to be a huge part of this problem, and for physicians to ignore it and pretend it's a minor thing just didn't make sense to me. And I thought that we needed, and I still think that physicians need to take the lead on this and to explain to patients why eating the correct things is important, and to show them, and not to delegate this out and relegate it to other people that maybe don't garner the respect of patients as much. The patients need to see that, hey, this is an extremely important thing, and in my opinion, it's way more important than most medications or surgical treatments that you would get. And so the late Sir William Osler, the godfather of internal medicine, if you will, said something to this effect: let your medicine be your food and your food be your medicine, and it reigns true today still. And so that's a big part of what I do and why I do it. And so when you talk about obesity and it being a complex disease, and body fat and being an organ and how it's affected by what you eat, I really like talking about this subject because there is a powerful, powerful impact on your body when you eat certain things, and it can be for good or for bad, and I want people to always know about that. So many of you who will watch a broadcast like this know great detail about what I'm talking about, but there's also people who don't. And there's also people who are making mistakes who don't realize that they're making mistakes. And so I see this every day in my office. Yesterday, this is a slower time of year, and I have two offices, one in Durham and one in Raleigh. And in my Durham office, I saw about 75 patients yesterday. And so they just keep, they just keep rolling in. So you'll see a whole blend of people, and some of them are doing really good and are right on top of the game, and some of them are making mistakes and don't realize it, and you have to point out some of this stuff. So I don't ever make assumptions when I talk to crowds of people or groups of people that everyone just kind of knows and they're all doing the right thing. And so if some of this stuff I say seems repetitive to you, remember that there may be people in the audience that don't necessarily know all the things that I'm saying. So one of the common mistakes that I see has to do with things that grow on trees and bushes, right? And so you make an assumption, and we're told that everything that grows on a tree or bush is full of vitamins and nutrients and fiber, and therefore it must be good for you, and so on and so forth. And no matter how many times I say it, and how many handouts I give, and all this other sort of thing, this idea of fruit still creeps into people's minds, and And when they're not losing weight, I can usually find it in their diet somewhere. And you have to remember that when you raise your blood sugar, you're going to raise your insulin level. And insulin is the body's fat storage hormone. Now, you were created to make some insulin, but you only need a little bit. And our ancestors only made a little bit. They ate a diet of animals for the most part. And there was some vegetable matter there. And to the extent that they ate grain, it was genetically very different, and they could not refine it. They were extremely active people. And so they never had surges in their blood sugar, and therefore never had surges in their insulin levels. And their DNA is not adapted to such things. And they passed that to us. And the idea that fruit was in their diet historically just isn't true. The genetic manipulation of seeds and so forth had not happened. And fruit did not have all of the sugar in it historically. And it was kind of a substandard thing to eat that people would resort to if there was nothing else to eat. I mean, it was kind of a measure of last resort if you were starving. The primary reason to ever grow any fruit was mostly grapes for the purpose of fermenting them to make wine, because people didn't want to get sick by drinking water that had, cholera or bacteria that would cause dysentery, for example. And this was the reason they would do that. But it was more of a kind of a public health measure, think of it that way. This was the primary purpose of fruit. It really wasn't that, human beings on this planet were growing it to eat it. They really didn't value it in this way. And so along comes this modern generation of people, and we've been hoodwinked into thinking that this is somehow very healthy to eat a lot of fruit. Well, I would say it's probably just as healthy to eat a bag of Snickers bars every day. You would be just as good off from a sugar standpoint, frankly. And maybe in the case of a lot of fruit, you'd be better off eating some candy bars, because at least some of those candy bars have a lot of fat in them that will slow down the spike of the sugar and therefore slow down the rise in the insulin rate. It shocks people when I say that. But, from a weight standpoint, a precipitous rise in your blood sugar is a bad thing, because it's going to cause a precipitous rise in your insulin level, and it's just going to signal your body to stay in a mode where you store fat, and this is a bad thing. We want that not to happen. We want that insulin level to be low so that your body can turn on its fat burning machinery, right? So that is a mistake that I continue to see over and over again. And if I could encourage anyone who listens here, if you're an extremely physically active person from an exercise and lifestyle standpoint, I would entertain a small amount of certain types of fruit, but a very small amount. Otherwise, I would say just your goal ought to be to eliminate it from your diet completely. Vegetables are a much better option for you in this regard. So that is a common mistake that I see in people who are trying to improve their health by losing body fat. The other mistake that I commonly see that I wanted to address in this video, and it's a basic fundamental thing, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about it, and it's hard to decipher from the medical literature the truth about this, because it's not the kind of thing where you can study it very easily. The subject I'm talking about is exercise. So the common thing would be, or the lore, the information that's passed down from generation to generation is, if you exercise, you lose weight. And I would like to dispute this notion. In many cases, exercise causes the exact opposite. And so I would be very careful about making this assumption that if I exercise more, it's going to help me lose weight. For reasons that maybe aren't so exactly clear, many people gain weight in response to exercise. I said the last time that I spoke to you on a Facebook Live event that obesity is a disease and it causes a very disordered biology. And so your response to certain things is not something that would be very predictable. And this is one of them. This is one of the manifestations of obesity as a disease. So in 15 years of treating patients with the disease of obesity, what I have found is that patients who attempt to do exercise at a certain intensity, in my opinion, form a response that is a stress response, and this causes weight gain. It doesn't help them. Yes, they do get in better cardiorespiratory condition, for example, but they do not have a change, a significant change in fat mass or lean mass composition that is favorable. They gain weight and they can't lose weight, and it doesn't help them. And so I often have to get them to do one of two things: either to stop exercising, and if they're good about their diet, they continue to lose weight at that point. And if they decrease the intensity of the exercise, in many cases this will do the trick. And so I use the historical example of walking. And you can think of any great figure of history. I live in the southeastern United States, and it is primarily a Judeo-Christian area for the most part, where people go to church on Sunday and this sort of thing. They grow up this way, so they're familiar with the Christian figures. So I use Jesus a lot as my example because they relate to this, right? So I say, well, did Jesus ever join a YMCA? You know, did he have to join a YMCA to stay thin? And they always laugh and say no. And I say, yeah, right. There's no record of him lifting weights or doing boot camp classes or joining CrossFit or anything like this. He just walked everywhere. Okay, so walking is a good example of a low intensity exercise that, in my opinion, does not cause this stress response that leads to weight gain. So this would be one example of something that I would say, yes, you can do this form of exercise and I think it's okay and you're not going to gain weight. So two things we've talked about so far in terms of the context of obesity as a disease and how you can make mistakes that might hinder the treatment thereof. The first would be having fruit in your diet. The second would be exercising, and exercising at an intensity that causes a response where you gain weight. So exercising harder does not always pay off. Now, I'll bring up a third thing that I see sometimes. You look at a spectrum of patients. I talked about seeing 75 patients yesterday. Well, everyone's a little bit different. And so when we approach these ketogenic concepts, you'll see we try to distill it down more into a general thing so that everyone can understand it. But the truth of the matter is there's some personal variation there. So it depends on each person and their degree of insulin resistance and so on and so forth when you see them. But one of the things that I see is that people make the assumption, and I know many of you know this, they make the assumption that, okay, I'm going to restrict my carbohydrate intake and I'm going to replace that primarily with protein and fat, and they replace it with, in many cases, a lot of protein and some fat. And for people who aren't that insulin resistant, that works, and they lose weight fine, and they lose body fat fine. But the more insulin resistant a person becomes, this is a problem, because your body can convert a certain amount of that protein to sugar, to glucose, and this can lead to the insulin spike again. The textbooks teach that it only converts a small amount, but I think your body gets very efficient at converting larger amounts. And I've had to deal with patients who really got their carbohydrate intake down, say to 30 grams a day gross, who weren't losing weight correctly, and their protein intake maybe was too high. Say it was 150 or 200 grams a day. They didn't need all that. And so it was a matter of getting them to eat more fat and decreasing the amount of protein that they ate. And that solved the problem. And the way that that works is that your body can't convert the fat to sugar. And therefore you don't get the insulin spike, and they immediately start losing weight. So that's another thing that I commonly see. And if you're trying to lose weight and trying to lose body fat, and you're doing a carbohydrate restricted diet and you're having a difficult time losing weight, I would suggest that you look at this. There's different ideas. I've had people go as high as 80 or 85% of their calories being from fat to get them to lose. But I've had people that lose just fine at just 50% of their calories being from fat. And so you'll have to do a little self-experimentation on yourself to figure out, hey, where do I fall on this spectrum? But if you're open-minded about it, I think you'll find where you fall on that spectrum. I think that the general idea is that there are people who could, and you could be one of them, who take in too much protein, convert it to sugar, therefore keep their insulin level too high. You might find that in this case, if you were actually testing to see if you were in ketosis, that you're not. And this would be the reason why. So that would be kind of a third mistake that I see people make. And there's a little bit of a personal variation there in figuring out where you fall. But it might be worth looking into if you're trying to lose weight and body fat and you haven't been successful. Now, there are some remedies that I use in someone who I think is really insulin resistant and they're having a hard time losing weight. So insulin resistant means that if someone really has for a long time in their life been just a carb junkie, and they've constantly had high glucose and high insulin levels, their cell membranes become really resistant to insulin. And so the insulin's out there in the bloodstream and it's telling the body, store everything as fat, don't lose any weight, right? And it's out there brokering this response, and it can't act on the cell membrane because the cell membrane is saying, no, I'm not paying attention to you anymore. And therefore the glucose is out in the bloodstream and has a hard time getting inside the cell because the insulin's not doing its job at the cell membrane. So you got glucose and insulin out here, they're floating around out in the bloodstream, and they need to get inside the cell. And even with the person on a really carbohydrate restricted diet, they're not losing weight, they're not in ketosis, and I'm fiddling with these protein and fat ratios, and they're still losing very slowly. In that case, I might use a little something. So there is a medicine used in pre-diabetics initially. That's its FDA approval. It's been around for many years, called metformin. And now metformin originally came from my recollection. Forgive me if I'm not exactly right about this. It's a plant of some kind. I want to say it was a tree bark, maybe of an Asian type plant, but I could be wrong. I know it's a plant. Anyway, it wasn't something that was synthetically made. It was something that we discovered from a natural source. And the bottom line is, when people take this, it sensitizes that cell membrane again, the specific insulin receptor there, to insulin over time. So you have to take it for a while, and it actually sensitizes this receptor again to insulin so that insulin can pass more freely from the bloodstream to inside the cell. And this lowers your insulin level, and then you can start losing weight. So it's a really inexpensive and older therapy that I use in patients who are really insulin resistant. And you don't even have to have that. It's the same molecule is found in a supplement that you can buy at a vitamin store called Berberine. Berberine, Berberine, Berberine. And so Berberine does the same exact thing. it costs more to get it from the vitamin store than but you got to go to the doctor to get the metformin. So Berberine will do the same thing. It's the exact milligram dosage as the metformin. And so a lot of my patients will go to the vitamin store and they will buy Berberine, and they'll take Berberine as a supplement. There are some contraindications, in my opinion, to the metformin, and they probably ought to be contraindications to the Berberine. I've never, the vitamin companies aren't required to say all these things because they're not subject to the government scrutiny that the prescription drugs are. People with renal insufficiency, renal failure should not be taking metformin. It doesn't. You have a hard time clearing it from your kidneys normally. So I would say that if you have this condition, you probably ought not take Berberine either. The side effect that I would say that people experience with it if they get it is that if they take it on an empty stomach, it can sometimes cause them to have an upset stomach. So when I tell people about it, I say just take it at the end of your biggest meal of the day and be consistent. It takes weeks to get the effect of changing the sensitivity of that insulin receptor at the cellular level. But I've had a lot of success stories on it, and you don't even have to see a doctor to go to the vitamin store and buy Berberine. There's not a particular brand. I don't sell I don't own a company that makes Berberine. No one's paying me to tell you about a certain brand. So I'm not recommending a particular brand. There's a lot of different brands out there. So most vitamin stores you go on Amazon and order it, and if you have Amazon Prime, it'll probably be to your house tomorrow. So the dose that I typically tell people to use is 500 milligrams. Start out at 500 milligrams a day. And over a period of about 3 weeks, try to get it up to 1,500 milligrams a day, like one tablet 3 times a day with food. But I would do that slowly because of its ability to upset your stomach. So that would be another thing as a natural supplement if you wanted to take it. If you were having trouble losing weight while you're doing a ketogenic diet and you couldn't understand why and you seem to be doing everything right, it might be worth trying that. And it, you get it from a vitamin store or off Amazon without ever having to go to the doctor, and you could get the same effect as the metformin. So there's a little tip there. The other mistake, one final thing, as we kind of come near to the end of the talk, we talked about first, just making sure fruit's out of your diet. Don't fall for the trick. 2, be careful about exercise. It can actually impede your weight loss. 3, watch that protein to fat ratio. If you're not losing, you could be more insulin resistant than you think, and too much protein can get in your way. And then 4, we talked about maybe using some Berberine if you need it. And then the final concept that I want to kind of talk about and maybe that I see that keeps people from losing weight is that, and this is in people who've lost weight already, but maybe they haven't lost the amount they wanted to lose. So let's say they weighed 200 pounds and they wanted to get to 150, and they lost down to 170, and they're just kind of stuck there at 170, and their body doesn't want to let them go down lower than that, and they're doing a ketogenic diet, and they're very good, and all of their numbers on their labs and so forth look great, right? So from a health standpoint, they're doing good and all of that. Well, I told you before that obesity is a disease, and your body has these set points, and it doesn't want, it's like, hey, I don't want to let you go to that weight. In fact, I want to make you go back to 200 pounds, maybe higher. So that's part of it. But your body has an energy regulation system up here in your brain, and eventually that kicks in. And so obesity as a disease, the parts of your brain that sense the normal amount of food to eat and say, in the periphery of your body, then that signals this part of your brain that says, hey, enough, all right, that whole mechanism is not working right, and never will work right again if you have this disease. So you have to then yourself at this point say, okay, am I taking in too much food? Even though if it's the right kind of food. So when you first go on a ketogenic diet, your body's so happy that you're eating the right kind of food, it just immediately starts losing weight when that insulin level comes down and losing body fat. But at some point in a lot of people, they get stuck and they can't go past it. And this energy regulation system is saying, hey, you're taking in too much. You can't sense that, okay, because that part of your weight regulation system is not working correctly. And you have to consciously say, okay, do I need to eat less? Do I need to, volume-wise, eat less on a ketogenic diet? Now, I always say that eating less works. It absolutely, you'll break through a plateau. If you don't believe me, I always say, I'll put you in the desert in a country where there's a famine. And I promise you will die thin and you will not die overweight. Okay? So calorie restriction at this point does in fact work. You will overcome certain weight plateaus by restricting the amount of food you eat. And this is true. So that's an extreme example, but it makes an example, exemplifies the point I'm trying to make. In this regard, now, Glenn has not paid me to say this. No one asked me to say this. I have managed my weight for 15 years now, and I have found this to be personally true in my life. And one of the things I really like, and I keep in my office, I sell a lot of it, and I use a lot in my personal life, are these Adapt Keto bars. Okay, I like these Adapt Keto bars. And what I've found with this is the perfect amount of food. You know, this seems like a small bar, right? But this bar, for me, in many cases, in the middle of the day, is all I really need with a cup of coffee, as, given the amount of activity I'm doing, as a meal. Okay, it's not like I'm out plowing a field with a horse in front of me, or building a house. I'm in an air-conditioned office sitting in a chair. And so I'll have one of these, and they're high in very good quality fat, and they're really excellent in their taste, in my opinion. And I'll just have a cup of coffee with it, with a little heavy cream, and calorically, it's not a high-calorie lunch. And I just wait. I wait 30 minutes after I've had it, and then I feel the effect of satiety. And that lasts for hours. And I didn't take in a bunch of calories, and it allows my weight to go down when I'm trying to lose, and to maintain once I've lost the amount that I wanted to lose. So that seems like a lot smaller amount of food than what a lot of people think of as a normal meal. But I would challenge you to rethink the amount of food that you're eating. What is really necessary? If I eat the small amount of this high-fat food, should I just wait 20 or 30 minutes, let the feeling of satiety catch up with me, and then make a decision, do I really need more? If I was a lot more physically active during the day, perhaps then I need more than that. But I think when most of us look at our lives, if we live in the United States, we'll have to admit, nah, we're not that physically active. And probably if you began to test yourself and try this, you would realize, you know what, I really do feel satisfied on a much smaller amount than I thought I would. And that's really all you need. And you'll find in the example I used, the person who's 170 pounds is then able to go on and lose the final 20 pounds. So that would be probably the last point I could make here, because we're about a little over half an hour into the talk now. So I hope that this was helpful for you. I could talk all day about various concepts related to obesity and how you treat it and the science of it and how low-carb ketogenic diets really work in correcting it and all of its manifestations in as far as other diseases. And I really look forward to doing that at the Adapt Your Life North Carolina event that's coming up on Saturday, September 22nd in Roxborough, just north of Durham, North Carolina at the Westwood Baptist Church. Again, I just want to put in a reminder that this is going to be a great event. I'll be there. Dr. Eric Westman's going to be there. Amy Berger's going to be there speaking. Christy Sullivan and Casey Durango are going to be there. And it's going to be a great time. And if you're in the area, I would highly encourage you to come out and be a part of this. If you consider coming to the area, come on. It's a great chance to interact with us, the speakers, and with a lot of people who are very passionate about this. And I think it'll be well worth the time and money that you spend coming out, and you'll have a fantastic time. So thanks again for listening to everything I've had to say, and I hope you all have a great weekend. Take care.